I am an undocumented entrepreneur. I'm an indigenous descendant, and I am an educator at heart. I came to the United States when I was 7 from Cochabamba, Bolivia. And when we came here, we followed an aunt and an uncle who had been living already in Los Angeles specifically. So when we flew in, we landed in Miami and then took another plane straight to LA. And that was a kind of a very interesting time for me because I went from having a bunch of cousins, primos and primas, running around in our backyard back then, and smiling and laughing, and then coming here and then almost effectively losing all of that kind of like childhood joy with being with family, mainly because it was just me and my two brothers, my parents, and then my aunt and uncle who had two kids as well, my two cousins, and love them. But then it was just kind of us because it was just so little of us, I guess, and my parents had to like work consistently, right? Because at the time, or even now, LA has always been expensive. But as a kid, you didn't really know that, right? It's just kind of like parents are saying like, "Hey, we got to work," and we grew up in a 1-bedroom apartment, and so their task was like, "Hey, while we're working, please just go to school and do your homework," and that was kind of the main task. And then very quickly, early on, I would learn that LA it's a vicious city. It's a very dog-eat-dog world. Even though I went to a predominantly, Latino, Hispanic, like I grew up in a Latino Hispanic neighborhood, for the most part, it was made very early on known that I wasn't Mexican, right? Because you could tell. I mean, I'm from another country, Bolivia, and we're not homogenous, right? Like everybody has their own culture, everybody has their own way of speaking, kind of Spanish in a way, and so I remember I would be saying a couple things. They're like, "How do you what?" Like in Bolivia we say polera to say t-shirt. Mexicans don't say; they'll say camisa, and they're like, "Polera, what's polera?" Like, "Where are you from?" And that's good. And I'm like, "Oh, I'm from Bolivia." Like, "Oh, where's that?" And so initially I would learn like, okay. I think now I know that kids can be pretty mean, and at that time it's like, yeah, kids were pretty mean, and I felt like, okay, like I have to. I need to know kind of where I'm at in this neighborhood, right? Then on top of that, the majority of us were pretty low income immigrants, or just kind of generational folks who just kind of were living in the cycle of poverty a little bit, right? Generational poverty is kind of what it seemed we were all growing up in. And the history of gangs in LA, like it's real, and that was part of that neighborhood. And so also early on, I realized like, okay, I gotta kind of, in order for me to stay out of trouble, I'm gonna listen to what my parents are saying, which is education, right? Like, let's focus on education. Let's do my homework. And because they couldn't pick us up after school, they could take us to school, but they couldn't pick us up there. Like, please just like go straight home. So I'd be kind of, you still see this every now and then because this is just what low income people have to go through it. And sometimes they can't sacrifice work. And so they were like, hey, I was one of those kids that just walked home after school, in elementary school. And so now, luckily, I didn't live too far from the elementary school, so it was only maybe like a 10-minute walk. And it'd be me and my younger brother at the time. My older brother was in middle school. But because of those experiences, for me, and growing up in LA, I was made aware that, like, okay, I'm not Mexican. And then also everything I'm seeing on TV, like, I'm clearly not white, and we're not wealthy. We're not Hollywood. Like, do I even belong in like society, right? Is my existence valued? And at that point, I began to internalize a lot of shame and self-hate, meaning like, oh, everything I come from, like it's not valuable. The music that we listen to, the Andes music, is not valuable. The dance that we do is not valuable. Nobody does it. Nobody understands it. And I don't have blonde hair and blue eyes. Okay, and then this is like, how do I survive in this? And so because of that self-hate and internalization of shame, I realized like, okay, let me just become as American as possible, right? So that to me meant like, let me learn English as quickly as possible. And let me try to sound as white as possible. Let me try to like adapt to like this thing that I think at that point in my thought at that point was like, yeah, that's when things will get better, right? Which is pretty terrible. And so that's kind of how I grew up. And it wasn't until much later in life, like in college, absolutely, where, and like later on in college, that I had realized, oh man, that was me trying to internalize white supremacy and like, you know, and come to a place where I could just destroy everything that I came from. Yeah. And so that was really tough. And I only realized that kind of like, I was very lucky. Found that I was undocumented my senior year. I was very lucky to get a full ride scholarship. A businesswoman started a private scholarship just for undocumented students. And so that's how I got to college. And of course, I didn't want to take for granted any of that opportunity. So I tried to learn as much, try to do as much. And part of that learning was taking Latin American studies courses, right? For me to kind of learn exactly what did I miss out on, right? Like what did my family leave behind? And so that's when I started learning about the history of my own country and other countries as well. And that's when I got curious and I started poking around, exploring more about who my grandparents were, who their parents were, what did it mean for us to be indigenous? Like I was like, you know, yeah, why are we brown? What does that mean? And started learning that Bolivia has like hundreds of indigenous languages that are spoken there, tons of history there. And I learned that I'm actually Aymara Quechua, so to come from two different groups. One being Aymara, the other one being Quechua, and those are kind of the biggest groups, I would say, in Bolivia. Yeah, and so that's how I learned about where I came from, and I kind of started to understand, oh, okay, that's where I come from, and I looked deeper into the practices, and I fell in love with everything that they stood for, and continue to do so, and that's when I realized that, oh yeah, like I definitely like internalized white supremacism, and then also like Spanish. That is also a colonial language for me, right? That actually Aymara Quechua, we speak Quechua, and my mom speaks a little bit of Quechua too. My dad as well, and everybody in my family's out there speak Quechua. But because I came here, I never learned any of that, or the dances, the beautiful dances. One of which is caporal, is beautiful, and you know. And so that's when it all started clicking, right? I was like, okay, if I have to acknowledge, and I do now, that I'm an indigenous descendant, right? Like that's where I come from, and at the same time, I live here now in the United States, and there's very little of that, and that's okay. But there's even more reason for me to say, yeah, I'm not. I can't speak Quechua outside of a few phrases, right? And I don't live there clearly, but can I still say I'm an indigenous descendant? The answer to me is yes. That is part of who I am. That's part of my history and my grandparents' histories, and so I want to keep that going. I returned the next day to the college counselor's office, and I walked in. Hey, Ms. Soldevilla, I don't have a social security number. How can I proceed? And when I told her that, she was like, it was a couple seconds, but it was a pause that felt much longer. She was like, so you don't have a social security number? It's like, no. Can your parents pay for school? And I was like, how much does school cost? And they're like, oh, it's in the thousands. I was like, no, I don't think so. We don't have that much money. She was like, okay, I have no idea how to help you. And if you don't have your social, you can't get FAFSA. And if your parents can't pay for it, then I'm not sure how you can get to college. And so I was like, what does that mean? I'm like, she was like, well, I don't think you'll be able to go to college. I don't know how to help you right now. And so that to me, I was like, all right, thank you. Let me go figure this out. And as I walked away and was processing, right, I was like, wait, yeah, I don't think like all this that I've been working towards too, and you know, LAUSD, that's the school district, the whole time, like they would feed us like, you gotta go to college. Here's all the data, you'll make more money, right? People with college degrees that make more money, like traditional and stuff. Like, and I bought it, right? I was like, so I did everything I could to get to that point, and I was like, wait, I don't think I'm gonna be able to do any of that. It's not for me. And so that was to me a very, very like tough point. That's when it hit, right? I was like, shit, like my future is over. My future is over. And I went into like a very dark space mentally. I was like, damn. So at that point, like my attitude changed for sure. It's because when I would speak to my friends who I grew up with, we grew up in the same neighborhood and play football too, or whatever it was. Or we're also very like motivated to go to college, right? It's kind of in that friend group where everybody wanted to go to like a very like a prestigious school, etc. Or just to go to a 4-year. And I'd be like, yo, man. They're like, hey, Luis, like, so we're gonna apply to this. What schools are you gonna apply to? And I was like, dude, I don't think I can apply anymore. They're like, well, what do you mean? I was like, I'm undocumented. They're like, what does that mean? I didn't get it. And when I explained to them, like, but you grew up here. I was like, I know, but this is what our college counselor told me. He's like, nah, you'll be all right, man. It's like, kind of just like shutting down that experience. And I don't blame him because how would they know? I was barely understanding that process. Like, dude, I don't know. But the point was that nobody could understand what I was going through. And despite living in LA, surprisingly, nobody else in my friend group was going through that. Like, nobody else was undocumented. I don't know anyone else who was undocumented. This is LA, right? So it's a little bit surprising to me at that time. But I was like, it was a very dark space. And so that's how I found out I was undocumented. So I did what I kind of saw my parents doing a little bit, which is like, damn, when life hits us really hard or there's very difficult moments, we kind of refocus on the work and just kind of put our heads down and continue with the work as if nothing really was happening, right? Which is a very toxic kind of way of addressing issues is kind of how I look at it. But I think a lot of, immigrant families don't have the luxury of understanding how else to cope with some of those things. But that's what I did. I was like, all right, you know what? Like, I'm very sad. I'm not sure what my future holds for me, but I have a football game every Friday night. I have practice every day after school. I have like all these classes, AP classes, have a lot of homework. So maybe just go ahead and do this and kind of do the thing, right? And, when I would play football, so I would kind of forget about that stuff, right? When I do my homework, I would kind of forget about that stuff. But then it would always come back when I wasn't there. It's like, man, this place, like, this is pretty terrible. And so for that entire first semester, it was like a very, very difficult semester. Because, my teachers and my friends didn't understand it. Even though they tried to be cheerful about it, but they just didn't get it. Like, dude, I don't understand. But, like, so that's kind of what it was. And it wasn't until maybe, like, at the end of that semester where the same college counselor called me back and was like, hey, Luis. Sent me a little note. It was a blue paper. It's like, hey, come see the counselor. So I went. I go down there. Hey, Miss Olivia. She's like, hey, I just wanted to give you this. And she hands over, like, kind of, like, thick, like, packet paper, right? It was a scholarship. Back in those days, at least in my school, everything was on paper still, right? We were still writing on the sheets. We were doing the whole thing. And so it was a thick package. She's like, hey, I just got this in my email box. I think you may qualify. Look into it. And if you do, just let me know and we can help you apply. Looked at it, and that's the scholarship. It was the Erica Glazer Family Scholarship. And Erica Glazer is a businesswoman out in California. And later on, I would meet her, and an amazing kind of, advocate for immigrant students. But her whole thing was that, to help, kind of people at the margins. And for her, it's primarily undocumented youth, documented students, that we can help them ensure they can get their life together and earn income. And ultimately, that's good for business, right? If everybody can get to a place where, like, their life is great and they have expendable fundings, expendable money, right? That's what's going to make every neighborhood better. And so she had created that scholarship, and that's what it was. And it was and when I say a thick packet, it was, because it required a lot. But when I looked at it, ultimately it said, this is a scholarship just for undocumented students, just to go to one particular university. And I was like, I think I fit this. And so that was the kind of, for me, I was like, man, this might be my only chance, because outside of this, I have no idea what I'm going to do after I graduate. I might have to turn to, like, I don't know, selling weed, selling drugs to be able to, like, earn an income, because what else am I going to do? Like, I can't work, it turns out, right? I can't get a driver's license. None of this stuff is going to be available to me. And so it was like, all right, apply for the scholarship or, like, do some terrible things to get through life. I was like, all right, let me just apply. What I liked about that scholarship, or essentially some of the questions were very like reflective. So essentially being like, hey, how do you see, what's your vision of the world in the future? What are your leadership qualities, and what would you like to bring that to the future? How would you like to shape the future, right? So like things that are like at that level for me were like, well, I never thought about this. All I've thought about was just like homework and like kicking butt on the football field. Yeah. And so, which takes a lot, but it's all pretty like small things. So this, to think about like generally the world and to think about how we can make it better, I started to put together my kind of vision, and part of that vision was to like do something in the immigration world, do something that can help our undocumented families ultimately get to a point of citizenship. And so I was like, I'm an immigration attorney. I'm going to be mayor of LA. We're going to pass immigration reform. And so, I was like, it was a huge change in my brain at that point, because I was in a very dark space, and then saw this little glimmer of hope. And I was like, I need to make sure that no one gets into that dark space that I'm in, because I'm not so sure that's healthy for anybody. It's just a very sad state, right? I was like, people don't deserve to be there. And so I put off kind of like what we could do in those, and ultimately, several months later, I remember football season had already ended. I was in tennis season, and after practice, I had missed a phone call, but they left a voicemail. I was like, oh wait, let me get and they said, hey, we're calling from the Erica Glazer Scholarship, and we'd like to let you know that you have been selected. Yeah, and I was like, what the hell? I was like, yeah, please call us back, whatever. I was like, I hang up, and I'm like, I'm all screaming, like, and the bleachers, they're like right next to the tennis courts. My friends were like, what are you so happy about? I'm going to college. And they were like, cool, man, so are we. I'm like, yeah, you don't get it, but it's fine. Like, I'm going. Yeah. And so that's what turned things around for me. And that's how I was able to get out of kind of that very kind of dark hole, right? And at the same time, for me, I knew that when I say like I didn't take it for granted, is because I was extremely happy that I got it. But later on, I would learn that over 100 students applied for that scholarship, and only 2 people got it. So that means that, like, yes, I got this opportunity, but maybe over 100 other students didn't get to go to college because they didn't get this, right? And so out of like very few who are in the space, I was like, okay, what can I do to ensure that like we can bring more people along in that journey? And so, yeah, that's how I ended up kind of getting out of that very dark space. Right. For me, home is where family is at now. Yeah, absolutely. And so home is still Cochabamba, Bolivia, because I have my cousins there. And that's also another story, by the way, what it was like for me to go back and re-meet them. But Cochabamba, Bolivia is home. Los Angeles still home. My parents still live there. Yeah. And Colorado is absolutely my home. My wife lives here, and the majority of her family also lives here. So that's kind of my extended family now. And I love them. And I also have family in Florida. This is a weird one for me right now because of the terrible things that Florida lawmakers are doing over there. But one of my first primas, who's like a prima hermana, a sister, she's out there with her family, and so their home is my home. I try to visit them at least once a year, and so anywhere kind of where my family's at, to me, that's what feels like home. It's no longer like a location, a city. To me, it's just wherever like someone who's very dear and near to my heart lives. The time that I spend there, that to me is what feels like home. The American dream to me is it's alive, but it depends. It depends on the systems and networks in place in the locations you live. Yeah, so I feel like such a technical answer, but I mean, like, 10 years ago, I was like, the American dream is not for me. And in a way, I don't think it's been for my parents. Like, the American dream hasn't happened to my parents. Because after 23 years of living in the U.S., they still rent. They're still in the same place, the same 2-bedroom apartment that we later moved into in LA. And so, and now for me, it's like, I got into a place where my wife and I own our little townhome, right? So we got into that level. But it's not a townhome where we can say, like, it's small, it's nothing crazy, it's nothing fancy. And it'd be very difficult to, like, have our parents retire and live with us. So I'm like, have we really made it in that sense? So I think for us, we're still defining our very own definition of what the American dream is like now for undocumented or for DACA recipients like us. And so, and I'm confident that I ultimately will shape a really cool definition of what the American dream could be like for DACA recipients, but I also know that that particular definition will only be accessible to undocumented immigrants who perhaps are connected to the systems that we're connected to, right? So the systems we're building here in Colorado, like, I would love to say that the American dream could absolutely be, like, realistic for us. But if someone lives in a different state, it doesn't have in-state tuition, like the minimal thing you need, I feel like I'd be lying if I would say, like, the American dream will be available to them. California, I think the American dream could be available to a lot of people because of, like, everything they've done over there. Like leading the nation and a lot of the stuff they're doing. They got Immigrants Rising out there too, and they do amazing things. To wherever you're plugged in, I think there absolutely is a way. But I do think the American dream will be shaped slightly different, and that's no longer just a home. It has to be. That should be part of it, but I think there's more to it than that, right? It has to be a way that can disrupt the cycle of poverty. It has to disrupt the trauma that we've all, that we've experienced. It has to include healing in some sort of sense. It has to include a peace of mind. It has to include forgiveness to ourselves and to our parents, because there's a lot of, like, tension that happens growing up, when everyone's under stress, and it absolutely should come with financial security as well, to a place where you can say, like, if something terrible were to happen to a family member, I have the savings to support them in that process. And if we can make that happen, that might I would say that would be our own version of the American dream. So our vision is to help undocumented families access upward mobility and build generational wealth. We define upward mobility as having access to high quality jobs and careers that provide a living wage. So at this point, we know that for me, it's people need a lot of tools to advance themselves. One tool that's always been extremely evasive to us has been money. And so for us, it's like, how can we ensure that our undocumented families have more money in their pockets, right? Because that ultimately will help them progress in life. And we have a really cool theory of change about how we see that and stuff, and how we can help people get to a place where they can build generational wealth for their line, right? And so so everything we're doing now is, like, to get to that point, to get to that vision where this idea of, like, yes, if you're undocumented, you could still achieve whatever it is. And we define that in numbers because we have to. And I've definitely taken for us, it's that financial position is kind of where we're at now, mainly because we know the policies are in place, and at least here in our state. And now it's about the direct, like, person-to-person things. What can we do now on the ground to be sure that people can get there? And so I'm super excited about the future because for us, it's having a bigger team. And we need a bigger team because we want to increase our impact, right? Right now, We want to ensure that more and more people can renew their work permit. And if they're income eligible, that we can ensure they have a grant, and that removes a financial barrier for them, right? And it's important because you need your DACA and to keep working, to keep helping yourself and their families. And a lot of our DACA recipients have kids, so we know how incredibly important that is. And with DACA looming, the end of DACA looming in early 2025, for us it's like, okay, we want to get as many people to renew their work permit as possible. That's just like a really important goal to us. And so part of that will be like, can we build the system, the technology to be able to scale our impact? In order to scale, we know we're going to need more people. So can we become a place that hires even more people, and that creates that living wage for everybody who works here? And then we really want to lean on technology in the future as well. Like one example is our advanced parole service. One of the problems we started seeing with our families was that when they travel or when they have to do anything related with customs and borders, their anxiety and stress levels are off the charts. They're very high. And so we said, can we build a virtual world where we can simulate what that experience is like so that we can reduce their stress and anxiety? And so we built that, and we're testing it right now to see kind of what the results are. And it's mixed initially, is what we thought. Some people think it's really helping. It's like, oh crap, this is what it's like. Okay, I have a mental memory of what this experience would be like, and I feel so much better about going on my AP trip here coming up soon. And then we also have the other one where we have technical challenges of we're saying this is cool, but the VR headset is making me dizzy. So anyway, we ultimately want to lean on technology to be able to support and help people, perhaps with their health. Ultimately, if we can reduce anxiety levels, as well as with just being able to get more people at the palm of their hands our service, right? And then obviously those who absolutely face financial barriers, can we get the financial assistance they need so they don't miss a beat, right? So they don't have to perhaps choose between a meal for their kids or their work permits, and letting their work permit expire, right? And so can we keep that secure now? And can we help each other in a place where we know or where we feel like the powers that be don't necessarily want to help us, right? So just build a system of where our community can help and self-determine for each other what our solutions are to us. And so in the future, it was just a bigger team, a bigger organization, getting to a place of sustainability where legal services can truly thrive and be accessible to all families, and just becoming a beacon of hope, a model for other states and for other cities and nations and other entrepreneurs too, to see that what we're doing here can be replicated. Absolutely. And we can do that and help thousands of people across the U.S. Well, I would say my message to the world, to communities listening out there, is that I hope that people can treat people as if they were the immigrant themselves who just moved to a new country and has very little support from anyone, if any. And if you can put yourself in those shoes and act and see in that way what it's like, then I hope that when you come back to your actual shoes where you are today, that we can make this world more inviting and more welcoming for all immigrants.